You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from Massachusetts in the USA.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. Before we start, we would like to give a huge shout out to our newest Patreon members, and they are Amy Brown, Iris Moreno, Michelle Painter, and Kathleen Lee.
Thank you so much. Speaking of Patreon, the first episode of us talking and sort of reviewing and giving you our thoughts on true crime shows and documentaries is already online. It's available for our Murder Tier members, and the first show we're discussing is Candy. It's on Hulu. It's about Candy Montgomery, who murdered her affair partner's wife, Betty Gore. So check that out. It's interesting. All right, so now we're going to jump right back into the life and times of Phineas Taylor, a.k.a. P.T. Barnum. If you haven't listened to the previous 2 episodes, please go back and do that. It'll help everything make more sense. But if you need a quick refresher, Johanna has got you covered.
Yes, so we started with the history of freak shows and the cultural fascination with human curiosities, and then we kind of explored the roots in ancient and medieval times, their evolution through traveling fairs and the so-called cabinets of curiosities. And then we also needed to talk about the troubling legacy of human zoos and ethnological exhibitions, which kind of sets the stage for Barnum's rise as a master showman. We touched on his early life and his marriage to Charity Hallett. And then in episode 2, we talked about his first major successes, like the very infamous and very problematic Joyce Heath exhibition and the creation of the American Museum, which became a landmark in the 19th century entertainment landscape. Unfortunately, the museum burned to the ground, was rebuilt at another location, and then burned to the ground again. And this led to Barnum launching the greatest show on earth in the 1870s, which was a traveling circus that redefined live entertainment. But we also talked about his family life a little bit with Charity and their 4 children, one of whom died in infancy. And we discussed the heartbreaking loss of Charity in 1873, and then his remarriage to Nancy Fish. And then we kind of mentioned that he went into a business partnership with a man named James Anthony Bailey, who was a logistical mastermind and who helped to take the circus to the next level. And this is pretty much where we left off, with Barnum and Bailey joining forces to create the most ambitious and spectacular circus of their time.
But honestly, I think right now we need to take a little bit of a step back because we haven't even touched on the traveling circus so far. Not really. We told you last week, after losing not 1, but 2 American museums to fires. And they were big museums. We posted pictures in the Facebook group and in our socials. But when I initially was reading and hearing, he had a museum on Broadway, in my mind, I was picturing like a very small, dark, I don't know what I was picturing. It was huge. It was a huge, massive edifice on Broadway.
Yeah, as we said, at their height, they had 15,000 visitors per day.
That's right. Yep. Huge. So, yeah, he lost not 1, but 2 of them to the fire. And now he was searching for a new way to make his fortune. And that's where we see entering P.T. Barnum's grand traveling museum, menagerie, caravan, and circus. It's very clear what it is.
It's everything.
It's everything. It's like if I had been the one to name this podcast, it would have been like Annie and Johanna's rambling, different topics, but they're all dark.
But not all.
Not all. But sometimes there are exceptions.
I think it's worth mentioning that at the time of the circus's launch, P.T. Barnum was 60 years old. So he was at an age when many are already counting down the days to retirement, and that's the age Barnum was pretty much just getting started with one of the most ambitious projects of his career. And I think once more that's a good lesson to learn here. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old to buy a circus train and travel the country.
That's right. You're never too old to become a trapeze act, and don't let anyone tell you differently.
My back would kind of veto that.
You're never too old to be one of 40 people stuffed into a VW bug. Okay. To understand why P.T. Barnum's traveling circus became such a monumental success right at this point in time, we have to look at the railroad expansion happening across America in the mid-19th century. By the 1870s, railroads had transformed the country, connecting cities and towns like never before, and like never since, really. The American railroad system has gone to seed, unfortunately. It would be nice if we could restore that, because this would be really hard today. At this time and place, what this meant for traveling entertainment, especially freak shows and circuses, it was totally revolutionary. Suddenly, shows could travel farther, reach more people, and carry more elaborate equipment than ever before.
Yeah, sure, because before that in just wagons.
Yeah, that's right.
How much could you take? Yeah, how much could you bring? How far could you go?
And you needed horses to pull those wagons. Yeah. And so for Barnum, the railroads were the key to this next big business. He recognized that a mobile attraction would allow him to reach new audiences in a way that a static museum never could. It makes sense, right? Even today, most people in the U.S., let alone the world, will never be able to travel to New York City. So if the mountain will not come to the prophet, then the prophet must go to the mountain. And Barnum did, with the help of rail transport. Barnum was able to create larger, more elaborate shows that moved from town to town, bringing the spectacle directly to the people. When he launched P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum Menagerie Caravan and Circus in 1871, it was a logistical Herculean task. They not only needed to move performers, but also exotic animals, massive tents, theatrical props, and everything else needed to set up and tear down an entire day of entertainment within a day. Because P.T. Barnum's show wasn't just a circus. It was pretty much a mobile version of his American museum, containing educational exhibits with live performances. It offered a mix of everything: freak shows, animal exhibitions, showcasing exotic creatures like lions, tigers, and elephants, some performing tricks that wowed audiences. And don't get us wrong, none of that is great for today's standard. I don't think we need to tell our long-term listeners, but if you're new to our show, we are very, very much against animals performing in shows like this, just as we hope we don't need to tell you that we are very much against human exploitation. But this is also a big part of history. And as we say all the time, it was a different time. Anyway, there were equestrian acts with riders performing incredible stunts and choreographed routines, acrobatic displays, clown skits, and so on and so on. There was something for everyone. You could really take your whole family, including the little baby and grandma, to see the show, just as much as you could take your sweetheart on a date there. A good time was guaranteed. And we already mentioned it last week. Many times, the circus would do a parade through town where everyone could see the artists and the animals for free. And some of these carriages were gorgeous, so elaborate.
Yeah, and I think that must have been nice. I mean, I know for Barnum, that was just another tactic to entice people to go see the spectacle. I think he called it, quote, the advertisement you can't ignore, end quote. But I imagine there must have been many kids whose parents just couldn't afford to take them, and at least he wouldn't go back to school on Monday and, everybody was talking about, oh my God, did you see the elephants and lions and the fire eaters?
Right.
And whatnot. And they could say, yeah, I saw them as well, even though they couldn't go to the circus.
Totally.
Yeah.
We were talking about that a little bit last week, I think, how nice it was that this was an option. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And because we love a good statistic over here, let's take a closer look at just how ambitious this whole thing was from the very beginning. So exact numbers for that first year are very hard to come by. We know that within just 2 years, so by 1873, his circus employed approximately 1,200 people. That included everyone from performers and handlers to laborers, administrative staff. For context, that's the size of a small village working together to bring the greatest show on earth to life. Wait, let me rephrase that. That's pretty much 6 times the tiny village I live in. And the tour itself was extensive, and they were crisscrossing the United States. And let's talk about ticket prices. So in 1871, tickets cost 50 cents for adults and 25 cents for children, which is pretty affordable for a family at the time. And adjusting for inflation, that would be about $11.50 for adults and $5.75 for kids in today's money. Considering the scale of the production, it was an absolute bargain. Today, I think you'd probably have to sell your kidney to take the whole family to such a prestigious show. Especially in the US, apparently, I think your ticket prices, thanks to all the hidden fees you have, are even more outrageous than over here. And don't get me wrong, it became outrageous over here as well.
Oh, no, it's such a huge problem here. I know it was a really big thing just recently during Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. I knew people. I knew somebody who flew to Canada and I knew somebody who flew to Paris to see her shows because much like when we went to Canada to have Paul's LASIK surgery done, it was cheaper to travel to another country, stay in a hotel for a few nights, and buy the tickets than it was to get a ticket to a U.S. show near them. It was wild. So I did take the time to look at what a similar show would cost today. Let's imagine what a ticket to a show as massive and famous as Barnum's would cost. For comparison, let's think about Cirque du Soleil with its jaw-dropping performances and very high production value. Tickets for Cirque start around $50 and can easily go up to $250 or more. For a show like Barnum's, with its exotic animals, daring acrobats, and massive 3-ring setup, you'd probably be looking at $100 to $150 for general admission. And we know Barnum wouldn't settle for just a regular ticket option. There would definitely be premium seating, VIP experiences, all the stuff Ticketmaster tries to trap you into buying today, I'm sure. Maybe a backstage tour, a chance to meet some of the performers, something like that. You'd easily pay $250 to $1,000 or more, depending on how exclusive it was. And I guess the thing I keep thinking about this is sort of like how Broadway's gone on tour. You know, you can go to New York and see a Broadway production, or here in Boston, we actually get a lot of the shows before they go to Broadway here, so we often get the original casts as well because we're so close. But there are touring casts that go all around the country, you know, and I've seen touring shows, and I've seen the same show on Broadway or in the West End, and I gotta say, same quality. So it's the same kind of thing, right? We're going to take the show to the people. And today, in this economy, with the way tickets are, Barnum Circus wouldn't have just been a show. It would have been a whole event. The kind of thing, I mean, I really do keep thinking of it like the Eras Tour, because whether or not you care for her as a performer, it was an insane event. And I think this would have been very similar to that. You know what I mean? And knowing Barnum, he would make sure you felt like every penny was worth it. Because as he always said, quote, "The noblest art is that of making others happy," end quote. Or in his case, making others happy while he was raking in the profits.
I mean, can you blame him? Don't be fooled, even though, or maybe actually because so many could afford to go, the circus first-year revenue was more than impressive. So Barnum's traveling show grossed a whopping $400,000 in 1871 money. And when we adjust for inflation, that's apparently around $9.2 million today. The funny thing is, in the Facebook group, we just discussed how our level of richness scales work, you know, horse money, heirloom carpet money. And this was definitely horse standing on heirloom carpet money.
That's right.
And with these numbers, it's no surprise that Barnum's traveling circus set the standard for what a modern circus could be. The king of Hamburg had found the perfect formula for success. Bring spectacle to the people, capitalize on curiosity, and keep the show moving. And Barnum's vision for the future was clear. Bigger, better, and always moving forward. By 1875, he had finally rebranded the show as The Greatest Show on Earth, which I think was the right choice because it has a much better ring to it.
Definitely. Less of a mouthful. That's a lot to fit on a t-shirt.
I mean, it's like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, something like that.
Exactly.
Well, anyway, the show definitely lived up to its name. I think he could use that name without a problem. So by the time Barnum partnered up with James Bailey in the early 1880s, he had already laid the groundwork for what would become a global phenomenon. But together, they would take The Greatest Show on Earth to even greater heights. Would it then be the greatest show in the universe?
I mean, yeah. All right, let's talk a bit about James Bailey. First things first, if you think, oh, James Bailey must be the character that was played by Zac Efron in the movie, sorry, but no, you're in for a disappointment. Zac Efron's character in the film, Philip Carlyle, is the dashing young partner who helped Barnum take his show to new heights. But Philip Carlyle is entirely fictional. The character is loosely inspired by figures like James A. Bailey, but Carlyle is a narrative device in the film, just a composite character created to add drama, romance, and some musical numbers. In reality, James Bailey was the logistical genius behind The Greatest Show on Earth, but he doesn't appear in the film at all. Of course, the film was never aiming for historical accuracy. It was all about spectacle, something Barnum himself would have appreciated.
You know, I have been thinking about this a bit lately. I truly think Barnum would have been very pleased with the way he was portrayed. And I think he would have been especially pleased with the fact that he was played by Hugh Jackman.
Oh, for sure. He would not have been pleased if, some new unknown person was cast to play him. He would have been thrilled that the Wolverine, and the chops were right. All right. Back to Bailey. He has a pretty fascinating story himself. So he was born James Anthony McGinnis on the 4th of July, 1847, in Detroit, Michigan. He was orphaned at a young age and started working as a bellboy in a hotel where he caught the attention of a man named Fred Bailey, a circus legend in his own right. Fred took the young James under his wing, giving him a new name and a crash course in the world of traveling entertainment. James Bailey quickly rose through the ranks of the circus industry. By his 20s, he had already earned a reputation as a brilliant manager, known for his logistical genius and innovative ideas. He worked for several prominent circuses before eventually becoming a co-owner of the Cooper and Bailey Circus, which toured successfully across the U.S. in the 1870s. Now, if Barnum was the ultimate showman, Bailey was the logistical mastermind. He was the kind of person who could take Barnum's grand ideas and figure out how to make them work in the real world.
Can you imagine what kind of job that must have been? Like working with Barnum and Barnum coming with everything he has in his head, and then you're like, okay, how can we do that?
I feel like that's Paul being married to me. Kind of. He's like, okay.
He's the Bailey to your Barnum.
He is.
Oh, that's romantic.
Yes, he's the Bailey to my Barnum, but we're animal lovers. Okay. So by the late 1870s, the two men were aware of each other, and it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed.
Yeah, I think in a way it was only natural for them to partner up eventually, which they finally did in 1881 when Barnum joined forces with Bailey and a man named James L. Hutchinson, who was another prominent circus owner at the time, and they created the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And one of Bailey's most important contributions was perfecting the use of the railroad transportation to move the circus from city to city. Of course, as we said before, other circuses, including Barnum's own circus, had used the railroad before, but not as efficiently as Bailey. First, he commissioned custom-designed railroad cars. And these weren't just average freight cars, they were specifically built to handle the absolute unique needs of the circus. One car might carry animal cages, another might hold wagons, and then there was another one designed for the living quarters for the performers and staff. Essentially, Bailey created a self-contained traveling city that moved efficiently from one town to the next. And then there was the special packing system. It was an innovation that sounds simple and logical, but at the time was absolutely genius. Bailey's crew loaded the cars in a very specific sequence so that the first thing needed at the next stop, like for example the tent poles or the animal cages, was the first thing off the train and the last thing on the train. And this meant that the circus could start setting up immediately upon arrival, and they were wasting no time. Speaking of time, Bailey worked with the railroads to create very precise schedules. Trains often arrived at night or early in the morning just for them so that the circus could set up while the townspeople were just waking up. And by the time people ventured outside to start the new day, the circus parade would be marching through the streets, making it absolutely impossible to ignore them. Bailey also used multiple trains to organize everything. One train might carry performers, another the animals, and yet another all the props, tents, and staging equipment. And this segmented approach kept things organized and ensured nothing got delayed. And let's not forget a very important part, advertising. Bailey didn't just bring the circus to a town, he made sure the town was ready for circus, that they were waiting eagerly for the circus. Trains carried endless supplies of posters, banners, and handbills, which were plastered everywhere weeks in advance already, and by the time the circus rolled in, excitement was at its peak and the crowds were practically guaranteed to flood in.
So smart to send a train ahead just with propaganda and advertising, right? Bailey also played a key role introducing the 3-ring circus format, which allowed multiple acts to perform simultaneously. This innovation made the circus more exciting and, let's be honest, for some of us maybe a little overwhelming for audiences who were now surrounded by nonstop action.
Honestly, it sounds exhausting. It's one of the things that make me want to take a nap, but I can't because I feel overwhelmed. And also, you know how nowadays people say, the young people don't have attention span longer than a minute? Like, this was the 1880s and they already were surrounded by performers in 3 rings simultaneously.
One wasn't enough anymore. We had to do 3. Oh, yeah, it's a lot. All right, so this next part is very important, but also very terrible, and it fills us with rage and makes us very sad. So we're going to talk about it. In 1882, Bailey helped orchestrate the purchase of Jumbo the elephant, one of the most famous attractions in circus history. Jumbo was born around 1860 in East Africa, most likely in present-day Sudan. As a baby, technically a calf, he was captured by hunters and eventually found his way to the Jardin des Plantes in Paris. In 1865, at approximately 4 years old, Jumbo was transferred to the London Zoo, becoming its first African elephant.
Here's an interesting fact for you. African elephants were incredibly rare in European history right up until the 19th century. And Jumbo, in fact, was one of the few documented African elephants to set foot in Europe since the Middle Ages. One of the earliest known instances involves Louis IX of France, who in 1255 is said to have sent an African elephant to King Henry III of England. And this elephant became quite a curiosity and was kept in the menagerie at the Tower of London until its death, which is also very sad, but it's medieval times. What can we do? I think I told you that the zoo in Vienna, the zoo at Schönbrunn Castle, is the oldest zoo in the world and they're still operating today. And they received their first elephant in 1770, but that was actually an Asian elephant. So by the time Jumbo arrived at the London Zoo in the mid-19th century, African elephants were still an exotic and rare sight in Europe. We were mostly used to Asian elephants.
At the zoo, Jumbo quickly became a favorite among visitors, especially the children who delighted in taking rides on his back. Jumbo the elephant wasn't just famous, he was huge, and I mean that literally. At his peak, Jumbo stood about 3.23 meters or 10 feet 7 inches tall at the shoulder. To put that into perspective, the average African elephant today stands somewhere between 2.5 and 4 meters tall. So while Jumbo wasn't the tallest elephant ever recorded, he was absolutely enormous by 19th century standards, more used to an Asian elephant, which are overall smaller.
Yeah.
Still huge, but it wasn't just his height. Jumbo weighed an estimated 6 metric tons, or around 13,000 pounds. That's heavier than some modern SUVs. And remember, this was a time when most people had never seen an elephant in real life, let alone one as massive as Jumbo. I feel like at that period in time, like seeing your first elephant, you might as well be watching a T-Rex walk down the street today, right? It would be
absolutely.
so far beyond your wildest imagining. Jumbo's size and personality left such an impression that his very name became a synonym for anything gigantic. So if you've ever called anything Jumbo, like a jumbo jet, you have this elephant to thank for it. And after all we told you about Barnum, you might already know that he just had to have this gentle giant. So he contacted the London Zoo and offered to buy the elephant from them. The London Zoo initially resisted selling Jumbo, but as we know, money talks, and eventually the zoo gave in. P.T. Barnum paid the London Zoo $10,000 for Jumbo the elephant in 1882. Adjusted for inflation, that would be approximately $290,000 or $300,000 in today's money.
I have the feeling that this is like, it's a big investment, don't get me wrong, but it's for Barnum, it was a bargain. Like with all the money he knew he would make.
That's right.
From showcasing Jumbo, $10,000, $300,000 nowadays is nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Exactly.
He made $9 million his first year.
This is it. And I used to mistakenly believe that if there were animals in a circus that I knew they had to pay a lot of money for, they must treat them really well. I used to think this about everything. Like, oh, they must treat racehorses so well. Well, not all of them, do they? Like, there's just a dark side to all of it, all the time. That's why we're here. But yeah, so this deal caused a massive uproar when it happened in Britain because Jumbo was such a beloved attraction at the London Zoo. There was huge public outcry, protest ensued. Even Queen Victoria reportedly expressed her disappointment about Jumbo's departure. But it was a done deal, and despite the backlash, the sale went through, and of course, Barnum's investment paid off enormously. Barnum and Bailey knew that the elephant would be a game changer, and they were right. Jumbo became the star of the show, drawing enormous crowds wherever he went. Barnum billed him as, quote, the largest elephant in the world, and while that may not have been true 100% of the time, it was close enough that no one questioned it, and who was going to compare him to another elephant anyway?
True, yeah. And obviously he didn't just stop at selling tickets. They turned Jumbo into a brand, and that meant one thing: merchandise. A very wide range of products, and I mean very wide range of products, brought the world's largest elephant right directly into people's homes. Of course, there were toys and figurines, miniature versions of Jumbo that let children take home a piece of the elephant magic. Then there were posters, there were prints, there were postcards. Jumbo's image was plastered on everything from lithographs to souvenirs that people could buy as keepsakes. Barnum's promotional materials were already legendary, and selling this as a memorabilia only added to Jumbo's mystique. Do you think they had mugs? People love a good mug.
They really do. I saw an episode of the British Antiques Roadshow just recently, and somebody had brought in like either it was a pottery or porcelain. I think it was porcelain. And it was a Jumbo that was in great shape, considering it was from the zoo before he was sold. So it was this like beautiful Victorian, and, you know, the guy, the expert was like, oh, do you know who this is? He immediately perked up and he's like, this is Jumbo. And I got to see if I can find that. I only watched it recently, but I don't know how old it was. I record them on PBS.
Isn't it funny how these coincidences work? Because you watched it recently, but before we even talked about doing these episodes, right?
Totally. Way before we ever talked about doing this episode. Otherwise, I would have saved it. I'll see if I can find it. I bet it's out there somewhere on YouTube. But yeah, there were mugs. Jumbo's name and likeness appeared on household items like mugs, plates, and teapots. And what would you serve on those plates and in those mugs? You know, Jumbo branded biscuits and whiskey. Anything that symbolized size, strength, and quality would be branded Jumbo.
Coming back to what you said before, how his name became a synonym for anything big, Like, think about it. Today we say jumbo-sized without even realizing that we're invoking the memory of an elephant who lived over a century ago. And I love the history of eponymy and proverbial sayings. I collect a lot of these stories, and honestly, I have been thinking for a long time how an episode about it would be fun. We have a lot of those here from medieval times, and they are still used today. And I don't know, maybe that would be interesting for Patreon or something.
Oh, definitely. I think that would be very interesting and fun. I love that stuff too. We wanted to know how much money Jumbo earned the Barnum and Bailey circus over the few short years he was with them, and we couldn't find an exact number. But from what we could gather from experts on the subject, the best estimate for how much Jumbo made for Barnum during his lifetime is around $1.5 million, which equates to approximately $45 to $50 million in today's money when adjusted for inflation.
That's elephant money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now it gets really sad because tragically on 15th of September 1885, while the circus was in St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada, Jumbo was struck and killed by a freight train during an attempt to lead him across the tracks to his traveling carriage. This is an excerpt from the Chronicle from 25th of September 1885, which was a Friday, from page 2. Quote, "Touching obituaries have appeared in nearly all the daily newspapers on the sudden and tragic taking off of Jumbo, Barnum's big elephant. His name, we are reminded, has become the synonym of greatness, and the ignoble manner of his death is pathetically referred to as follows in the editorial columns of the Exchange. Quote, as the great king of beasts he was certainly entitled, if die he must, to obtain a worthier death than to be run over by a sneaking night freight train. He deserved at least a lightning express. It is as if Hannibal or Julius Caesar had been kicked to death by a mule." End quote.
Quite right. But Jumbo's impact did not end with his death because Barnum wasn't going to let Jumbo's story end there. After the accident, Barnum spun the tragedy into a spectacle of its own. Rather than admitting that they had been careless with their beloved elephant leading to his death, he claimed that Jumbo had heroically sacrificed himself to save a smaller elephant named Tom Thumb, who was reportedly with him that night. The story tugged on the heartstrings of the public, but it's more likely that it was another piece of Barnum's masterful humbug. Jumbo's body was quickly put to use as a scientific curiosity and marketing tool. Barnum had the body preserved, or rather dissected, and Jumbo's skeleton and stuffed hide became part of the circus's traveling attractions. The skeleton was sent to New York's American Museum of Natural History, where it became a popular exhibit. Today, Jumbo's skeleton is no longer on public display, but from what we gather, it's still preserved in the museum's collection, serving as a scientific and historical artifact. His stuffed hide, meanwhile, went on tour with the circus, ensuring that audiences could still see Jumbo even after his death. Eventually, the stuffed hide was donated to Tufts University in Massachusetts by Barnum himself. He was a trustee of the university. Jumbo became Tufts' official mascot, and his preserved body was displayed in Barnum Hall for decades. Tragically, in 1975, a fire broke out in Barnum Hall, destroying Jumbo's hide.
I'm sorry for the quick interruption. It's a whole lot of fire connected to Barnum, even if he already was dead at the time. But there's something.
There's a lot of fires.
That's too many fires.
It's too many fires. Yeah. So now all they have left are some ashes, which are apparently stored in a peanut butter jar kept in the university's archives. Is a quirky, slightly eerie reminder of his legacy. Even Jumbo's stomach contents became a subject of fascination and, for me, devastation. I think Johanna feels the same.
Yeah.
When examined, scientists found coins, keys, and other objects spectators had tossed to him over the years. And it's a grim glimpse into the life of a captive elephant and the public's horrendous way of engaging with him. And it gets worse. Jumbo's tail was removed and kept as a relic. Pieces of his hair were sold as souvenirs. And it just shows how Barnum could turn anything into merchandise. The location of these smaller relics are largely unknown, but we can imagine that it's likely some are still tucked away in private collections, some are probably in the back of an old sock drawer and you don't even know what your granny had, these little pieces of circus history.
Yeah. Speaking of Tufts University, P.T. Barnum may be known as the greatest showman, but in his later years, he also proved himself to be a committed philanthropist. Maybe he had learned something from Jenny Lind after all. After decades of building his fortune through his signature humbug, Barnum shifted his focus to give back, using his wealth and influence to support education, public projects, and social causes. And one of his most significant contributions was the aforementioned Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. So Barnum, as Annie said, served as a trustee and donated generously to the institution. And in 1884, he funded the construction of Barnum Hall, which housed a museum and natural history collection. And yes, that's where Jumbo's stuffed hide had ended up. Barnum firmly believed in the power of education to improve society, and his support helped ensure that young people had opportunities to learn and succeed.
Yeah, finding this out was kind of wild for me because I used to live on Quincy Street in Medford with my late husband before we moved to Wayland, and that is not far, like walking distance to Tufts, really close to Tufts University, and I had no idea Barnum and Tufts had this connection. I think Tufts also has an excellent veterinary sciences program. So I'm hoping that Jumbo contributed to, science in a way that's still useful today. It's just sad.
Yeah. The next one didn't come as a big surprise to me. Barnum was also an outspoken advocate for the temperance movement. That's the people who were against drinking and for prohibiting alcohol, basically. He believed alcohol abuse was one of the biggest problems facing society, and he gave public speeches promoting sobriety. I mean, he has a point there, I'd say. It was one of the causes he felt most passionate about in his later years. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't, because I think that probably a lot of the quote-unquote freaks in the show would likely have had alcohol problems. Only because we self-medicate, don't we, as people? We have done forever. Yeah. So I think the likelihood of people who were involved in the freak show aspect of things having substance abuse issues was probably pretty high. And in some cases, it could also be due to the fact that depending on what set them apart from other people, you would have joint complications and real physical pain that would maybe lead you to start drinking or using stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if he felt that the people who were supposed to be working for him, wasted a lot of time because of that. I'm not sure it was all altruistic or coming from a place where we are today of understanding how this stuff goes, but...
Oh, that's actually a good point, yeah.
You know what I mean?
What else? Barnum poured resources into improving his adopted city of Bridgeport, Connecticut. He donated money for public parks, libraries, and other community spaces. And even better, in addition to supporting education and civic projects, Barnum began to rethink some of the exploitative practices he had employed during his career. He expressed regret for the mistreatment of animals in circuses and advocated for better animal welfare standards, which, to be fair, far from perfect, but for that time rather progressive.
That's right. Maybe he realized he was wrong and wanted to do better, or maybe he wanted to just leave a more positive legacy behind. But whatever reason, we're glad.
Yeah. By the time of his death in 1891, Barnum had achieved unimaginable fame and wealth. His net worth was estimated at $10 million to $40 million, which would be an incredible fortune for the time and even for today. So adjusted again for inflation, that would be something between $275 million to $1.1 billion today. On 7th of April 1891, Barnum passed away at the age of 80. The cause of death was attributed to a combination of heart failure and the complications of a stroke he had suffered in 1890. Also interesting and not surprising, in my opinion, despite his declining health, Barnum had remained involved in his business ventures almost up until the very end, famously requesting updates on circus ticket sales in his final week even. His funeral was held in Bridgeport, and it was as grand as you might expect, attended by prominent figures and adoring fans and business partners and performers. He was laid to rest in Mountain Grove Cemetery, which is a beautiful space he actually had designed himself, which was a final testament to his legacy.
This is from the Boston Evening Transcript, Saturday, April 11th, 1891, page 9. Laid at rest, Bridgeport honors P.T. Barnum's memory. All classes suspend business for the funeral. Wishes of the deceased fully carried out. Quote, Bridgeport, Connecticut, April 10th. Universal sorrow prevailed throughout the city today, and everybody seems to be in deep mourning over the departed Phineas T. Barnum. This community begins to realize that they have suffered a loss that can never be regained. Business is generally suspended, and every citizen is given an opportunity to pay his or her last respects to the departed. The South Congregational Church, which has been placed at the disposal of the family for the funeral ceremony, was crowded to suffocation, and thousands that were unable to gain admission had to content themselves with viewing the funeral cortege as it passed the streets from the house to the church and thence to the cemetery. To the very few who gazed upon Mr. Barnum's face this morning as the body lay in its somber receptacle at Marina, it seemed as if the great showman merely slept. His head was turned slightly to one side in a natural position, and no features showed the slightest effect or disease. His whole appearance was benignant, and if he had arisen and opened conversation in his usual happy vein, the illusion would have been complete. The showman wore in death a placid expression in which no trace of pain appeared. How many times are they going to say that? I feel like they've said that thrice. Okay.
And I feel people were maybe even expecting him to just get out of his coffin and be ta-da!
I wonder if they ever considered making him just wink. You know that meme where people are like, play Pop Goes the Weasel at my funeral? I feel like that would be a Barnum. Surprise! Okay. Sorry, back to the article. The remains were arrayed in a black broadcloth full dress suit, turn-down collar, and white tie. Very formal. The remains of the great showman rested in a handsome, solid red cedar casket of Corinthian style. Not fine Corinthian leather. Sorry, I'm really losing it with this article. The remains of the great showman rested in a handsome, solid red cedar casket of Corinthian style covered with the costliest black English broadcloth. The trimmings and extension handles were oxidized silver. Upon an oxidized silver plate was the inscription, Phineas T. Barnum, born July 5th, 1810, died April 7th, 1891. End quote.
I didn't look up photos of his final resting place. Did you look them up?
I have pictures of his. Yeah, it's a really nice tomb. He's buried with his first wife, Charity.
Mm-hmm. But is it as grand as you would picture it for a man like Barnum, or is it just like...
It's pretty nice. Hang on, I'm going to send it to you right now. I see.
Yeah, it's big.
It's really big.
It's big, but something is missing. Je ne sais quoi.
Like there should be a balancing horse or something on the tippy top.
Something
there should be some kind of something. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Well, that was disappointing.
I know. But yeah, we'll post a picture. It's nice. It says like Phineas Barnum. It's got his dates, and then Charity, his wife, and her dates, and then Frances J., their daughter, and her dates. She was only a year, so in 11 months.
Speaking of his daughters, his wealth was divided between his charities and his family, mostly his daughters, Caroline Cornelia, who was his eldest, and she had actually shared a close bond with her father and often accompanied him on his travels. And then the second oldest, who was Helen Maria. We told you last week that, as you just said, Frances Arena had died in infancy, and unfortunately the youngest, Pauline, had passed away in 1877 at the age of 31 from measles and diphtheria, two very preventable illnesses today, not back then.
So sad. 31.
Yeah. Oh. And of course, another heir was his second wife, Nancy, which, as you might imagine, created some tension, I want to say, between Barnum's daughters, the surviving daughters. Caroline and Helen were reportedly very unhappy with Nancy's share. They apparently thought that it was too much money.
Yeah, we mentioned in a previous episode how Nancy, I think, was the daughter of a friend of his and also 40 years his junior. And so there were some rumors that they had been eyeing each other up or possibly worse while Charity was still alive. Again, rumors. But rushing to his friend's home where Nancy was, skipping Charity's funeral, and immediately remarrying had to be a tricky one for the kids, right? It just sounds like a modern day Reddit AITA kind of situation. And yeah, Barnum, for sure.
I mean, I know it was different times and people got remarried way quicker back then. But yeah, on the one hand, saying Charity was like his moral compass, his anchor in life and so on and so on. And then not even a year later, he's married again. Such a young woman.
I think it was like months, within 2 months. Like, it was very fast. I'm not judging at all, but I get why the kids weren't happy about it. Like, that's a lot. Totally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So after Barnum had passed away, his partner, James A. Bailey, didn't just keep the show running. He even elevated it. He purchased Barnum's share of the circus from his widow, and that made him the sole proprietor of what was still billed as the greatest show on earth. Under his leadership, the circus expanded in ways even Barnum might not have dreamed of. In 1897, Bailey took the bold step of organizing a 5-year European tour, bringing the whole spectacle across the Atlantic Ocean to audiences who had never experienced anything like it. This tour was a monumental success, introducing the world to the scale, glamour, and grandeur of the American-style circus. Bailey didn't stop there. In 1894, he took on the management of the Buffalo Bills Wild West show, proving his ability to juggle multiple massive productions at once. Like, he had it all. He had the biggest shows, truly the biggest shows. Tragedy struck in 1906. On 11th of April that year, James A. Bailey passed away at the age of 58 at his home in Mount Vernon, New York, due to a severe bacterial infection.
I think it's erysipelas. It's a really nasty, like, if you know what cellulitis is, which is a skin infection, it affects deeper levels and is caused by a streptococcus bacteria. So this would have been a really painful, terrible sort of death for him, if that makes sense. It would have just been a rampant, terrible skin infection that just ravaged his body.
And after his death, his widow sold the circus to the Ringling Brothers in 1907, and the Ringlings were already running their own successful circus, and the acquisition allowed them to merge the two shows into a single massive operation. In 1919, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus was officially born.
And for nearly a century and a half, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus lived up to its billing as the greatest show on earth. But after 146 years of dazzling audiences, the curtain finally came down on May 21st, 2017, with a final performance in Uniondale, New York.
Did you ever go?
I did. I went many times as a child to the, yeah.
Was it great?
It was great. Yeah. I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end. I have been. And them ending things was also bittersweet because I had such happy memories, but it was the right move. I'll talk about that more at the end. When it comes to P.T. Barnum, one question seems to keep coming up. Was he a genius or a con artist, a hero of entertainment, or an exploitive businessman? And the truth, like most things in life, isn't really black or white. It's a little bit of both. So let's start with the good, because I like to look on the bright side of things. Barnum was undeniably a visionary. He practically invented modern marketing, bringing spectacle and entertainment to the masses. He gave people like General Tom Thumb and Jenny Lind a platform, turning them into international stars. For some performers, Barnum's circus wasn't just a job, it was a ticket to fame and financial independence. He also pushed the boundaries of live entertainment, blending education, wonder, and just enough humbug to keep audiences hooked.
But, and it's a big but, Barnum's career wasn't without its darker sides. His early exhibits like Joyce Heth were absolutely, without a doubt, exploitative. And while he did later advocate for better treatment of circus animals, it's hard to ignore the years he spent parading elephants and lions and other exotic creatures for profit, often under conditions that were absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So, was he good or was he bad? And the answer is yes. Barnum was both. He was a product of his time, but he definitely also shaped his time for better and for worse. He exploited people and animals, but he also gave audiences wonder and joy. He stretched the truth to the breaking point, but he also popularized the idea of entertainment as something that could bring people together regardless of class or background.
I think it's safe to say if Barnum's life taught us anything, it's that there's always room for a little more wonder, a little more showmanship, and a lot more empathy.
And just as Annie predicted last week, we are running out of time again. So that means next week we will not be talking about B.T. Barnum anymore because he's dead and buried. So who cares? So next week you will hear all about... Well, that's not true. You know, we care.
We care.
Next week, you will hear all about, or a little bit about, those extraordinary people who were basically the main attractions of the circuses and the freak shows, are the ones who actually drew in the masses, but were so often exploited and abused, even after death sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. And those are the people who should really be remembered. You know, you might think of Barnum without the people we're going to be talking about next week. There would be no Barnum and Bailey circus.
Yeah. But I have one last great Barnum story that we can't possibly keep from you. Barnum is one of the few people who were able to read their own obituary only days before he passed away. And here's how that happened. So by March of 1891, Barnum's health was already failing and he knew the end was near. And ever the showman, and I think he was also a little bit a narcissist maybe.
Just a little.
Apparently, Barnum was kind of whining that people only say nice things about you after you're dead and then you can't hear them anymore. So, in true Barnum style, he decided to do something about that and he asked the Evening Sun, a New York newspaper, to publish his obituary while he was still alive and could enjoy it. And they did. On 24th of March 1891, the paper ran a headline that read, quote, "Great and only Barnum. He wanted to read his obituary. Here it is." End quote. And the editor even wrote, quote, "Mr. Barnum has had almost everything in his life, and there is no reason why he should not have the last pleasure which he asks for." End quote. We tried to find this obituary. We couldn't. We just saw quotes here and there. We just found the real one that was really printed after his death. But apparently the obituary itself was, of course, a glowing tribute calling him the great American showman and celebrating his 40-plus years of entertaining the public. It also highlighted his lesser-known work as a Connecticut politician. I think he was mayor of Bridgeport at what point. They talked about his philanthropy. And Barnum read every word, and no doubt he probably very much enjoyed all the praise.
Oh, for sure. All right. Well, stay tuned for the final episode next week on this topic. Do you have something good this week?
I think my something good is that, I don't know how it is in the US, but here in Europe, animal welfare laws have really changed. You can't have live animals in circuses anymore in most countries, thank God. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are still countries in Europe, but when it comes to the European Union, it's pretty much outlawed. And I think that's really something good and something to celebrate.
Totally agree. My something good is, it's kind of complex and something I think probably a lot of listeners that are my age or older or a little younger can relate to. Because as a child in the 80s, I did go to the circus. I went to the Shriner Circus, was fairly popular in Springfield near where we lived when I was young. And also, of course, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And it's so funny, the memories I have of these things. I remember, you know, it was like a flashlight, like a tiny flashlight, but the top of it was all like LED fibers. Do you know what I mean? And it would glow and light up.
Yeah, it was this like glass fiber.
Yes, exactly. I got one of those at the circus, and it was like the most magical thing I'd ever seen in my life. I was obsessed with it. I probably would have been, 5 or 6. These are memories, young, And then, of course, as a kid, we also went to the Big E, which is our state fair, and I rode elephants there when I was young. And now as an adult, I feel really badly. It's similar to how I feel about, I saw Shamu in the 80s. I saw Shamu jump out of the pool at SeaWorld with the trainer on their nose. And it was magical. And now as an adult, you have such a different perspective, and you feel so badly that these animals were ever captured and forced into these situations and into these productions. It's so, so abhorrent to me now. And now I get why my parents were always like, no, you don't, like, I get it now. But it's hard to reconcile with memories that I have of the joy I felt, like touching the elephant, like riding on his back and leaning forward and stroking him, and feeling his skin and like, that's such a core memory in my life, but it's a shame I have it at the same time, I say all the time what a fan I am of that Maya Angelou quote, which is, just when you know better, you do better. That's the quote that I try to focus on a lot when I get hung up on things I regret, right? And I don't know that the circus stopped touring with animals because they cared. I think, honestly, it was people like us that
100%.
Sort of realized what was happening
if there would
and
have
said,
never been backlash
mm-hmm.
from the public, if times wouldn't have changed, if views wouldn't have changed on things, and now we just, as you said, we know better.
We know better, and so we do better. Yeah. And circuses can keep going without animals. I love Cirque du Soleil. There's so much that you can do that's hugely entertaining and doesn't involve torturing wild animals. You know what I mean? It's I'm just glad that we've righted a huge moral wrong. It took a really long time, and we still have a long, long, long way to go. But I do think it's something good that what happened to Jumbo is still happening for other reasons, but not because of a circus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Progress, right?
Yeah. Progress. In the background, you hear my wild animals. They're waiting for their dinner.
Are they giving you the tippy taps? Yeah. Dean is literally ferocious when it's dinner time. She starts trying to eat you. She comes up and she nibbles and nibbles and nibbles, and she'll bite at the rings on my hand. And if I have bare feet, she'll make eye contact and chomp on a toe. Like gently, but like to let you know she wants to eat. So.
All right. Let's finish this so that Jem and Lila get their dinner.
Yeah. You all know the drill. Please, if you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please, please, please write us a review, a nice review. It would be so great. It would really make our day. Tell your friends about us.
Yes. Share us in groups. If somebody asks about podcasts, about history, about murder, mystery, macabre, you know where you have to send them.
Yeah, it's funny. I recently had a friend say to me, I don't listen to your podcast because I don't like scary stuff. And I was like, we're not scary. I'm like, so many of our episodes don't even talk about murder. You're fine. So we appreciate it. Really. Thank you. Our email address is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. Our webpage is freshhellpodcast.com. And you can find information on how to reach us, our Patreon, our merch, anything else that you need information on.
Please tell your pets we said hi. Hug them, cuddle them. Always, always treat them kindly. They are also part of your family. Treat them like it. And be kind to your fellow human being.
Yeah, give people the benefit of the doubt.
Sometimes.
At
least once. If they're creeps, not. Don't let them creep you out.
No.
And be kind to yourself. And we know that's hard, but you gotta do it.
You do. And just remember, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.